The wedding day was meant for her sister, but Ava was the one who had to walk down the aisle, to salvage her family's honor. He, the stranger waiting for her at the altar, had known from the start that she wasn't his bride. Yet he stood there in silence, waiting. When love asks for nothing but itself, will you have the courage to claim it? Sometimes the one you've been searching for is the one who saw you clearly from the very first glance. Ava was not the bride, but if she didn't wear that dress, her father would die of shame right there in front of the entire town. The church bells rang out, deep and solemn, into the cold morning air of Aspen, Colorado. Ava clutched the wedding bouquet with trembling fingers, the thin lace gloves offering little warmth. The dress clung to her body like a snare, every breath a struggle. Hundreds of eyes were fixed on the church doors, waiting to open. The guests, draped in fine silks and tailored suits, wore bright, expectant smiles, eager for the grand moment. They were waiting for Emma Prescott, the bride of the hour. But Emma had vanished. And now it was only Ava, her identical twin, standing behind the doors, her heart pounding wildly, about to step into a destiny she had never chosen. She remembered the look in her father's eyes that morning, desperate, pleading, the gaze of a man who had spent his life building a reputation now clinging to. The last shreds of dignity. Please, don't let us lose everything. There was no way back. No other choice. The heavy wooden doors creaked open. A gust of cold air swept in, carrying with it the sharp scent of snow, the sweet headiness of jasmine, and the raw tremor of Ava's fear. She stepped forward. The veil fluttered gently across her face, blurring her features beneath the soft golden light that streamed from the high church windows. Every step toward the altar stretched endlessly, weighed down with guilt, terror, and unbearable pressure. At the far end of the aisle stood Henry Prescott. Henry, Emma's fiancé, young, composed, and enigmatic. Ava had seen him only a handful of times at glittering parties where Emma dazzled and Ava lingered in the shadows. Now she was about to become his wife, caught in a hastily staged charade under the gaze of the world. Lifting her chin, Ava forced her legs to move. Their eyes met. Henry's were a cool, stormy gray, steady and unreadable. There was no flicker of surprise, no trace of suspicion, only quiet observation. The first strains of Canon in D rose to the vaulted ceiling. Blossoms lined the aisle, shimmering. Under candlelight, their sweet fragrance cloying, almost suffocating, her heels pressed softly into the carpet of petals. Step by step, her heart pounded louder than the music. When she finally reached him, the air between them seemed to crystallize. Henry tilted his head slightly, narrowing his eyes as if seeing something no one else could. He leaned down, his voice a low, warm murmur against her ear. "I always knew. You weren't what they said you were." The words brushed her like a whisper, but crashed inside her like a tidal wave. Ava pressed her lips together, crushing the bouquet in her trembling hands, petals tearing silently beneath her grip. The priest began the ceremony. The prayers fell like drops of holy water, while Ava struggled to steady her breath, clinging to the last thread of sanity. Outside the stained glass windows, snow had begun to fall. Every vow she spoke tore at her like a blade. "I do." The words slipped out light as air, but bore the weight of an entire world. Henry slid the wedding ring onto her finger with careful precision, his eyes never leaving hers. Steady, gentle, yet somehow far away. In that moment, Ava felt as if she was standing on the edge of a vast unseen chasm. One misstep and she would fall, losing her honor, her family, herself. The priest pronounced them husband and wife. Applause erupted, filling the vaulted ceiling with a joyous roar. But inside Ava there was only emptiness. Henry bent down and placed a kiss on her forehead. A soft, reverent touch, not the passionate claim of a lover, but the welcome of someone who had found a lost soul. Ava closed her eyes, wishing she could disappear into that fleeting darkness. When she opened them, Henry had taken her hand, leading her away from the altar. The soft glow of golden lights stretched ahead. Snowflakes shimmered like tiny stars beyond the windows. Walking beside him felt like moving through a dark, endless dream, she could never awaken from. Outside, sleek limousines lined up in the thickening snow. Well-dressed guests in fur coats crowded around, showering them with congratulatory smiles. Henry opened the car door for her, his hand firm at her waist, careful as if he were handling something fragile beyond measure. Ava slid into the seat, her hands clutching the folds of her silk dress, the cool fabric slippery under her frozen fingers. The door closed, sealing them away from the noise and laughter. Inside the car, there was only the sound of their breathing and a heavy, stretching silence. Henry sat motionless beside her, eyes closed, but his even breathing told her he was not asleep. He was simply waiting for something. Ava turned her face to the window. Outside, the sky hung heavy and gray, snow falling thick and fast, covering every trace of the day behind them. And inside her, a slow, creeping fear began to bloom, a truth she knew she would not be able to hide forever. The limousine rolled slowly away from the church. Ava sat in the vast interior, her hands tightly clasped in her lap, the wedding bouquet wilting at her side. Outside the tinted windows, snow continued to fall, blanketing every road, erasing every trace. Henry sat beside her, silent. He hadn't spoken since they left the altar, hadn't asked why her hands were so cold, or why her eyes seemed hollow enough to break a heart. He simply leaned back against the seat, eyes half closed, as if offering her a chance to breathe, to recover. But Ava knew the silence wasn't absent-minded. It was a mask just like the one she wore across her own face. The car pulled up in front of a luxury resort on the outskirts of Aspen, the site of the evening's wedding reception. Lanterns lined the entrance, casting warm golden light across the fresh snow. Uniformed staff greeted them with polite smiles, betraying no suspicion. Ava stepped out, feeling the soft give of snow beneath her heels. Henry offered his arm, touching the crook of her elbow with a lightness that somehow left her anchored and exposed all at once. The crystal chandeliers spilled light over the red carpet, draping the grand foyer in breathless opulence. Laughter and conversation floated in the air, champagne flutes clinking, well-wishes ringing from familiar and unfamiliar faces alike. Every gaze turned toward the newlyweds. Ava forced a smile, forced her steps to mimic the effortless confidence Emma always wore so easily. But every congratulation, every admiring glance, was a tiny blade, slicing at the fragile mask she struggled to hold in place. Henry remained at her side, silent, watching. No compliments, no comforting squeeze of her hand, just his steady presence, as if he were patiently waiting for her to slip. Dinner began. They sat side by side at the head table, the candlelight casting long, trembling shadows. Course after course of delicate food appeared before them, fragrant and artful, but Ava's throat was too tight to swallow a bite. Henry nudged a glass of wine toward her. When she lifted it with shaky fingers, he tilted his head slightly. Voice light, almost casual. "Why did you change your perfume?" Ava nearly dropped the glass. She met his gaze, forcing herself to smile, the terror hidden beneath a thin veneer of calm. "I thought. Today called for something new," she said, voice almost steady. Henry said nothing. A smile flickered at the corner of his mouth before he returned to his plate, but his eyes never left her. Watching, measuring, as though peeling back each delicate layer of her disguise. After the main course, when the music shifted to a slow, aching melody, Henry stood and held out his hand. "Dance with me." There was no escape. Ava placed her hand in his, feeling the warmth of his skin seep into her frozen fingertips. Henry led her onto the dance floor. The lights dimmed, cocooning them in a private, shadowed world. He slipped a hand around her waist, drawing her close. Far too close. His breath stirred the fine hairs at her temple. Ava's heart hammered against her ribs, each beat threatening to crack her open. As they moved together in slow, aching circles, Henry leaned down and whispered, "You know, a single embrace can give everything away." Ava froze. She tilted her face up to him, searching for anger, accusation, but in those silver-gray eyes, there was only a vast, aching sadness. as if he mourned something already lost. She forced a brittle smile, tightening her grip on his hand, playing the perfect bride in their first dance. Henry said no more. He simply held her closer, as though trying to save something fragile that was already slipping through his fingers. When the song ended, Ava bowed her head and slipped away, mumbling about adjusting her dress. She crossed the grand hall quickly, slipping down a corridor lined with gold-framed mirrors, heading toward the private bridal suite. Locking the door behind her, Ava leaned against it, her breath hitching in her throat. The mirror reflected a stranger back at her, a woman with flawless makeup and a smile twisted by fear. She pulled off her earrings, her necklace, each sparkling piece clattering onto the cold marble floor. One by one, she shed the glittering trappings of a life that wasn't hers. Bracing herself against the vanity, Ava bowed her head low and whispered, "Am I saving my family, or betraying myself?" The muffled strains of music drifted up from the reception hall, distant and ghostly, like echoes from a world that had never been meant for her. And in that small, gilded room, there was only a lost girl clinging to a rising tide of fear, and she knew this was only the beginning. That night, Ava returned to the Prescott estate with weary steps. She moved quietly across the vast marble foyer, beneath the glittering crystal chandeliers, her heart heavy with a nameless dread. Henry walked beside her, silent as a shadow. Neither of them spoke. No one mentioned the dance or the cold, cutting words Henry had whispered against her ear. Only the soft echo of shoes against marble filled the cavernous space, a quiet reminder that every secret carried its price. The days that followed passed in a strange, slow rhythm. Ava remained at the Prescott estate, woven into its daily life, not as herself but as a player in the ongoing performance she was desperately trying to sustain. She dined with Henry, attended a few small gatherings, sat through, polished afternoon teas. To the outside world she was still Emma, but in the private hours, cracks began to splinter through the mask Ava wore. Each morning as snow blanketed the gardens behind the estate, Ava would slip outside, old shears in hand, and kneel among the sleeping flower beds sheltered under glass. She pruned dead branches, turned the frozen earth, tended to the tiny dormant roots Emma had never cared to notice. In those quiet hours, Ava could breathe, could remember what it felt like to be real. Henry found her there one morning. He stood leaning against the tall glass doors, arms crossed, watching her with a kind of lazy, intent curiosity. When Ava looked up and caught his gaze, she startled, the shears trembling in her hand. Henry didn't move. He simply watched. Only when she rose, brushing the dirt from her skirts, did he finally speak, voice low and amused. "I didn't think you liked getting your hands dirty." Ava smiled faintly, answering softly, "Sometimes. You need to touch something real." It wasn't Emma's answer, and Henry knew it. Something flickered across his face, an emotion too fleeting, too raw to name, and Ava felt it pull at her, terrifying and magnetic all at once. In the days that followed, Ava found herself wandering into the little town at the base of the hill more and more, not to shop for gowns or attend teas like Emma had, but to spend quiet afternoons in the old dusty library, reading aloud to a handful of poor children. At first, only a few came, huddled shyly in corners. Then, slowly, laughter filled the air. Small hands tugged at her sleeves. Bright eyes followed her every word. Ava told no one. She simply carried the secret warmth back home, tucked away in the quiet chambers of her heart. Henry discovered her. One late afternoon, stepping out of the library into the fading light, Ava saw his car parked across the street. Henry leaned casually against it, his coat fluttering in the cold breeze. He didn't approach. He simply stood there, watching her, his gaze warm and unwavering. Ava froze, her heart skipping painfully. She knew, in those small, unguarded moments, Henry was seeing her. The real her, and somehow, impossibly, he didn't look disappointed. He looked as if he loved even the parts of her she had never dared show. Evenings at the estate changed. The heavy, suffocating dinners gave way to quiet nights beneath the open sky. Henry would invite her to the back terrace where the stars spilled across the heavens like a river of silver. They would stretch out on fur-lined chairs, bundled in thick woolen blankets, speaking softly under the watchful stars. Henry told her of his lonely boyhood in the great empty house, of endless dinners, where smiles were as rare as sunlight. Ava told him of bare feet on summer fields, scraped knees, and secret dreams of flying away. They spoke of everything and nothing. No one mentioned Emma. Only Ava remained, even if the name she wore wasn't truly hers. Henry never pressed, never accused. He simply listened, with a patience and tenderness Ava had never known she could deserve. One evening, after a simple supper, Henry asked if she would walk with him. The snow had receded, revealing stone pathways shimmering in the moonlight. They walked slowly, side by side, the silence between them easy, unhurried. At the edge of the woods, where the wind whispered through the towering pines, Henry stopped. He turned to face, her hands tucked into the pockets of his coat, his gaze dark and steady. Ava stood there, the wind tangling her hair, her heart a wild, trembling thing. Henry reached out and took her hand, his fingers warm against her chilled skin. "You've changed," he said, his voice a confession more than an accusation. Ava looked up at him, confusion and fear warring in her eyes. Henry's grip tightened gently, and he murmured, "You've become the woman I always hoped to love." Ava froze. She knew in that instant they had crossed an invisible line. She was not Emma. She had never been Emma. And yet Henry's gaze, so kind, so open, made it impossible for her to pull away. So she stood there, letting him hold, her hand under the sprawling sky, feeling a trembling warmth radiate from her heart to her very soul. And in that fragile moment, she allowed herself to believe, just for a heartbeat, that maybe, just maybe, she was worthy of being loved for who she truly was, sometimes. It's the moment you lower your defenses that your heart dares to trust again. If it were you, would you have the courage to believe in a love that was just beginning, knowing it was built on a secret you could never fully confess? That night, after they returned from the edge of the woods, Ava couldn't sleep. She lay beneath thick wool blankets, in a room bathed in the soft glow of a corner lamp, yet the cold clung to her bones. Henry's hand had wrapped around hers with such unwavering sincerity. His words, gentle, profound, still echoed inside her chest. "You've become the woman I always hoped to love." Ava tossed and turned until the sky outside the windows paled to a misty gray. When the first fragile rays of dawn seeped through, the frost-blurred panes, she pulled on a thin coat and slipped out of her room. The Prescott estate was eerily silent at that hour. The only sounds the ticking of a distant grandfather clock and her own footsteps muffled against deep crimson carpets. She made her way toward the library, the one place she always found a sliver of peace, hidden from the watchful, judging eyes she hadn't meant to overhear. But just as she approached the heavy oak doors, a sharp, clipped voice froze her in place. An older woman's voice, cold and brimming with suspicion. "No, I don't believe she's changed. Something's very wrong." Ava's heart clenched. She stepped back, pressing herself against the marble wall, closing her eyes as if she could will herself into invisibility. Inside, the voice, Henry's mother, continued, softer but no less cutting. "I'll hire a detective. I'll find out the truth." Silence fell. Ava's knees buckled. She leaned against the wall, her breath coming in shallow gasps. The truth was closing in. Step by inevitable step. Clutching the folds of her coat, she turned away and slipped down the hall unseen. But from that moment on, every step she took felt unbearably heavy, as if the weight of the collapsing sky pressed down on her shoulders. The day passed in a haze. Ava moved like a ghost through the estate. Henry noticed. She saw it in the quiet way he watched her, the questions unspoken in his eyes. But he said nothing. He gave her space, as if he too was waiting for something neither of them dared to name. Outside, snow continued to fall, blanketing rooftops, stone paths, and barren trees in a beauty so sharp it bordered on sorrow. When night descended, there was a soft knock on her door. Ava opened it to find Henry standing there, bathed in the warm glow of the hall light. "I've prepared something," he said with a gentle smile. "A small dinner, to celebrate our first week together." Ava nodded, unable to summon the words to refuse. She draped herself in a thick knitted shawl and followed him through the long, dim corridors to a small sitting room tucked into the west wing, a space Henry had transformed into a private celebration. A round table draped in white linen, 2 glasses of red wine, candles flickering gently, their light dancing against the walls, a worn jazz record playing softly from a vintage player in the corner. Ava sat down, her heart swelling with a confusion of gratitude and guilt. They ate, exchanging small stories, offering each other fragile smiles, pretending for a little while that things were simple, that they were just 2 people trying to find warmth together. But every glance, every brush of fingers carried the weight of everything they left unsaid. After the meal, Henry rose and retrieved a small package wrapped in plain brown paper from a side drawer. He placed it before her. "For you," he said, his voice a whisper. Ava opened it with trembling fingers. Inside lay a soft leather journal, worn and fragrant with the scent of old paper and time. On the first page, tucked neatly beneath the cover, was a letter, written in Henry's familiar slanted hand. "If you are truly yourself," it read, "let your heart speak." Ava's vision blurred with tears as she read, her world shattering into bright splintered pieces around her. Henry did not love Emma, the cold, perfect image her family had built. He loved Ava, the girl who had, without meaning to, shown him glimpses of her quiet, aching soul. She lifted her gaze. Henry stood only a few steps away, his silver-grey eyes glowing with a tenderness that refused to judge or demand. No accusations, no ultimatums, just a silent invitation. Be yourself. Only yourself. Ava pressed the journal against her chest, unable to stop the tears streaming down her flushed cheeks. Henry moved closer, kneeling before her. Without a word, he reached up and wiped her tears away, with calloused, achingly gentle fingers. Outside, snow drifted down in soft, lazy spirals, blanketing the world in pure white. Ava clutched the journal tightly. Deep inside, she knew this fragile, precious dream couldn't last if she continued to live a lie. A choice stood before her, clearer than ever. Continue the charade, or summon the courage to bear the truth. For the first time, Ava felt the stirrings of a fierce, reckless yearning for freedom, even if it cost her everything she had learned to love. That night, long after the small celebration ended, Ava remained by the dying candle. The soft leather journal rested in her lap, Henry's words, inked in slanted blue, still etched into her heart. Outside, the garden lay buried beneath a thick quilt of snow. The golden light spilling from the estate made the tiny snowflakes glitter like 1,000 fallen stars. Henry hadn't spoken again after wiping away her tears. He had only squeezed her hand once, gently, then left her alone to think. For hours, Ava sat unmoving, listening to the slow, mournful ticking of the grandfather clock, feeling as if each passing second unraveled a little more of herself. She understood now. Henry had seen her, not Emma, not the perfect bride her family had demanded. But Ava, clumsy, fragile, heartbreakingly real, and he had chosen to stay. But what about her? What would she choose? When the first weak light of dawn stretched across the pine trees, Ava returned quietly to her room. She closed the door behind her, leaned against Kurt's cold surface, and felt the flickering birth of a decision, trembling but clear. She had to leave. She could no longer lie to Henry. She could no longer live inside a performance that hollowed her out more each day. Ava dragged her battered suitcase out from beneath the bed. In silence, she packed the silk dresses Emma had picked, the delicate stilettos that never truly fit, the heavy, dazzling jewelry that felt like shackles. Finally, she slipped off the wedding ring and placed it carefully on the bedside table. When everything was ready, she stood in the center of the room, gazing one last time at the walls draped in faded florals, the windows fogged with frost. This place had been her fragile refuge, nights spent stargazing, secret hours reading by the fire, but also her prison of fear and guilt. Ava pulled on her coat, tightened her grip on the suitcase handle, and drew a long, shuddering breath. She turned the doorknob, but as the door creaked open, a figure blocked her path. Henry stood there, arms crossed. His face was calm, not angry, not accusing, just profoundly sad. "You don't have to run," Henry said, his voice low but certain. Ava froze, hand clenching around the suitcase, every part of her trembling. Henry stepped closer, the distance between them shrinking to almost nothing. "No," he said quietly, his silver-grey eyes searching hers. "I've known from the very beginning." Ava opened her mouth, but no words came. Henry gently took the suitcase from her fingers and set it aside. His movements were patient, deliberate, not forceful, not demanding. He bent down slightly, voice barely more than a whisper. "I just wanted you to choose to stay. Not for duty. Not for anyone else. But for you." His words struck straight, through the last defenses Ava had clung to. She stumbled back a step, the tears breaking free, unstoppable. Henry didn't move. He simply waited, offering her the choice. A soft gust of wind stirred the hallway curtains, and with it, Ava felt something inside herself loosen, letting go of fear, of guilt, of everything that wasn't truly hers. She flew into Henry's, arms clutching him with desperate, shuddering strength. She buried her face against his chest, sobbing openly. No more Emma. No more perfect. Brittle expectations, only Ava, small, scarred, real. Henry wrapped his arms around her, cradling her as if she was something infinitely precious. No recriminations, no demands for explanations. Just two people, touching each other for the very first time without masks, without pretense. They stayed there a long time, embraced in the dim winter morning, the quiet hallway holding its breath around them. All the lies, all the fears, all the doubts melted like ice under the fragile warmth of a new day. And in that moment, Ava understood. She had found a place to belong. Not a house, not a role, but a person. Henry. After that afternoon at the little church on the hill, Ava and Henry didn't return to the Prescott estate. They rented a small cabin on the outskirts of town, where barren fields stretched beneath a pale, open sky, and winding dirt roads vanished into the trees. There, time slowed. No church bells, no glittering parties, no whispered judgments behind closed doors. Only the sound of wind threading through wooden shutters, the gentle creak of footsteps on old floors, and silences so tender neither Ava nor Henry wished to break them. Every morning Ava woke in Henry's arms, feeling his warm breath against her hair, the slow healing of her once shattered heart. Every afternoon, they wandered the open land behind the cabin, hand in hand, their conversations weaving together like a soft, unbreakable thread. And every night Ava sat before the fireplace, the worn leather journal Henry had given her resting in her lap, writing down the fragments of her soul she never wanted to lose again. A week passed. One morning, when the snow had begun to melt into puddles under the pale sunlight, a letter arrived, a simple cream envelope, the handwriting unmistakable. Emma. Ava sat on the front steps, her hands trembling slightly as she opened it. Inside, just one line. "You loved the right man. I was simply too much of a coward to keep him. No excuses, no apologies. Just a confession, plain, simple, carrying the weight of an entire ocean of unspoken regret." Ava folded the letter carefully, her fingers pressing it tight. A soft breeze stirred, carrying the scent of wet wood and the first tender shoots of spring, lifting strands of hair across her face. But this time, Ava felt no bitterness, no lingering pain, only a lightness. As if she had finally laid down a burden she'd carried too long, she rose and went inside. She found an old wooden frame, placed Emma's letter within it, and set it beside a small photograph, one of her and Henry, standing in a golden field hand in hand, smiling against a sky vast and clear, no lavish wedding gown, no grand church, Just two people. Just the truth. That afternoon, the rare, clear sky stretched overhead, blue and endless. Henry finished repairing an old barn hinge, brushed the dust from his jeans, and made his way back toward the porch. Ava sat on the weathered porch swing, bare feet brushing the ground, eyes closed, breathing in the cool, sweet air. When she saw him, she smiled and waved him over. He sat beside her, and the swing groaned under their weight, then began to sway gently with the rhythm of their shared breath. Ava rested her head against his shoulder, her breath warm against the rough wool of his sweater. The silence between them stretched out rich and whole, a lullaby with no need for words. After a long moment, Ava whispered, her voice soft but steady, "If I could start over, I'd still choose to love you, even if it cost me everything." Henry turned, his silver-gray eyes glowing with a warmth that felt like coming home. He took her hand in his, pressing it tight as if to etch her words into the deepest part of himself. "You are the one I've been waiting for my entire life," he said, his voice hoarse with quiet conviction, a gentle smile blooming across his face. Ava closed her eyes, her long lashes trembling. Her heart, once torn apart by fear, regret, and deceit, beat now with a steady, unshakable peace. There were no lies left between them, no masks, no barriers, only Ava, Henry, and the love they had built, through betrayal, forgiveness, and the brave choice to stay. And this time, Ava knew she wasn't running anymore. She had found her home, not a place, a person. That morning, after everything had cracked open, Ava and Henry stayed there in the hallway, holding each other, unwilling to move. The first light of day slanted through the windows, spilling gold across the cold stone walls. Outside, the world remained frozen and brittle, but inside Ava something had begun to thaw. For the first time, she didn't run. She cried in Henry's arms, raw and unguarded, and he stayed, steadfast, silent, sheltering her with his quiet strength. When they finally left the hallway behind, Henry didn't say much. He simply took her hand, lacing his fingers through hers, holding on as if anchoring her to this new, trembling reality. That afternoon, when the snow slowed and the sky cracked open into a muted golden gray, Henry asked if she would come with him, not to a party, not to a glittering gathering, just a short drive, to somewhere he wanted her to see. Ava didn't ask questions. She only nodded, her heart stirring with a quiet certainty. This moment would change everything. They drove up the winding hill, the tires crunching over old packed snow. Silent forests of ancient pines flanked the road, their branches heavy with winter's breath. The car rolled to a stop before a small stone church, weathered and unadorned, no bells, no flowers, just a heavy wooden door swinging slightly. In the breeze, Henry stepped out first and came around to open her door. Ava stepped onto the snow-packed ground, pulling her coat tight around her, staring up at the church with a tightening in her chest she couldn't name. No one else was there, only them, and the restless wind slipping through the cracks, whispering forgotten prayers. Henry took her hand again and led her through the doorway. Inside, the church was empty. Faded light streamed through stained glass windows, dulled by time, falling across rough wooden pews and cracked stone floors. No choir, no priest, no grand declarations. Just silence, vast and deep as the sea. Ava stood at the heart of the nave, her heart thrumming wildly against her ribs. Henry released her hand, stepping back just enough to meet her gaze. He looked at her, truly looked at her, and the softness in his silver eyes almost undid her. "You don't have to be anyone else," he said, his voice low, each word carving itself into the silence. "You only have to be yourself." Ava couldn't move. Every wound, every guilt-ridden memory, every self-reproach crashed over her in a silent, devastating wave. She saw it all. Her father's desperate pleading, Henry's mother's cold suspicion, the hollow fear that had shadowed her every step. And here, standing before her, was a man who asked for none of the lies, none of the armor, just her. Ava covered her face with her hands, the tears spilling freely. Her voice broke the stillness, a whisper barely carried by the air. I don't deserve you. I lied to you from the beginning." Henry stepped forward, placing his hand gently over her heart. That simple touch, steady and sure, felt like a vow in itself. He smiled, the kind of soft, steady smile that could rebuild a broken soul. "I didn't marry a name," he said. "I married the woman who taught me what it means to love." Ava lowered her hands and looked up at him through the blur of her tears. Henry sank to one knee on the cold stone floor. There was no diamond ring, no scripted vows, only two exhausted, battered souls bowing before something pure and undeniable. Ava knelt down beside him, resting her head against his shoulder. They stayed like that, silent, breathing in the sacred stillness that wrapped around them like a blessing. Beyond, the cracked windows, the sun was sinking, painting the sky in pale shades of gold and violet. The last light of day poured through the broken glass, draping them in a tender, fractured glow. In that moment there was no past, no fear, no more running, only a silent, indelible promise, etched deep forever. When Ava and Henry left the small stone church, night had fallen, snow had begun to drift again, soft and slow, feathering the earth in quiet wonder. They walked down the hill hand in hand, unhurried, never once looking back. They had left behind all that had once burdened their hearts. And ahead of them was a wide, unbroken road waiting to be written together. The days slipped by, gentle as the first breaths of spring winding through the faded fields. After that afternoon on the old porch swing, Ava and Henry no longer spoke of the past. They didn't need grand declarations or loud promises. Every glance, every brush of a hand, every quiet evening spent leaning into each other beneath the creaking eaves said everything that needed to be said. A week passed. Then a month. Then a year. Winter surrendered to summer, and when the fields of Vermont began to blaze gold under the slanting autumn sun, Ava and Henry had built a life, simple, steadfast, and soaked in love. They bought a small farm on the edge of town, where green rolled toward the distant hills like a painting left unfinished. On that land they opened a cafe and library called the True North. A simple name, but it held everything: the true direction, the true heart, the true self. The old farmhouse was lovingly restored, its rugged charm preserved. Inside, the shelves groaned with worn novels, threadbare poetry collections and half-forgotten diaries, each one inviting the weary to sit, to read, to lose themselves in a quieter world. Every morning, Ava sat by the wide window, where sunlight spilled like syrup across the pale wooden floor. She wrote short stories, about love, about faith, about choosing bravery over fear, tiny pieces of herself stitched into words she no longer hid from. Henry brewed coffee behind the worn oak counter, ferrying steaming mugs to tables, lifting his head now and again to find her across the room. And every time their eyes met, Ava smiled, a small private smile, stitched from gratitude and wonder, meant for him alone. In one corner of the cafe, atop a low wooden shelf, stood a small framed photograph, not a lavish wedding portrait, just a simple image. Ava and Henry kneeling beside each other in the crumbling church, hands clasped, eyes bright with a love too true to be adorned. No glittering gown, no shining gold bands, only love, raw, sacred, enduring. The photo sat there like a silent prayer, a reminder that sometimes the only promise needed to last a lifetime is the choice not to let go. That afternoon, the wind rippled through the fields, setting the wind chimes on the porch to a soft, lilting song. The melody carried across the cool air, threading itself through the golden leaves and open windows. Ava sat by the window with her old leather journal, her pen moving steadily across the pages. Outside, the E. Sunlight scattered like diamonds on the turning maples. A few guests lingered over their books and quiet conversations, mugs cradled between their palms. Henry approached, carrying a fresh cup of coffee, his fingers curling around the handmade ceramic mug. He set it down in front of Ava, then bent, low, whispering into her ear, his voice deep and warm. "No matter how wildly the world spins, I'll always find you." Ava set her pen aside and looked up at him. Her smile was small, luminous, a ripple of light across her face. She reached for his hand, squeezing gently, her heart swelling with a gratitude so fierce it made her breath hitch. "Because this time," she whispered back, "I'm not running anymore." Henry tightened his grip around her fingers and sat beside her, shoulder to shoulder. Together they gazed out across the fields where the wind bowed the tall grass in endless waves. No grand vows, no need for sweeping gestures, just two hearts, steady and sure, beating in time, once and forever. Outside, the wind chimes sang on, their music stretching out over the fields. A soft reminder. No matter how the world shifts, no matter how many false turns and lost battles, souls meant for each other will always find their way. And inside the little cafe called the True North, two once lost hearts had finally found their home in each other. Thank you for walking this journey with Ava and Henry. Some loves don't need a perfect beginning, only the courage to hold on. If today's story touched your heart, don't forget to like and subscribe so we can meet again in other beautiful stories.